My message this morning is, can you imagine that? And I'm going to be talking about being able to see life differently, being able to see possibilities for greater health, greater wealth, and happiness, especially in difficult times. Of all the 12 inner spiritual gifts that Unity teaches we are born with from God, I personally think that imagination is the most fun. The imagination has been called the eyes of the soul, and also the scissors of the mind by our Unity co-founder Charles Fillmore. When I was thinking of this message about seeing things differently, which is what our spiritual imagination allows us to do, I came across an article discussing how American novelists are careless and they don't give a hoot about their characters' eyes, and often ascribe to these human eyes extraordinary abilities. Here's an example from one novelist. And he said this about a female character's eyes. He wrote that her eyes wandered carelessly around the room, and then her eyes riveted him to the spot. Another novelist wrote that his character tore his eyes from his lover's face, and they fell on the letter on the floor. And I love the way another novelist describes what two characters in one of his writings, who are lovers, express their eyes. He said, their eyes met for a long, breathless moment, and they swam together. Eyes breathing and then swimming together. Isn't that fun? Can you imagine this? Jesus, our master teacher, actually shared quite a bit more about the capabilities of our eyes in Matthew chapter 6, verse 22 through 23. In this passage, Jesus says, the light of the body is the eye, and if therefore your eye is single, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is evil, your whole body will be full of darkness. Now, I found myself wondering exactly what Jesus was meaning in this passage. And after some reflection, I think Jesus was definitely talking about a different kind of seeing. A seeing done with our mind, not our physical eyes. And I think that Jesus was saying that if our eye, that is the focal point of our mind, is filled with light, because we are focused on what is life-giving, what is inspiring, what's healing, what's empowering, what's uplifting in our life experiences, then our whole body will be full of light, meaning that these experiences that we focus on will be found in our experiences. And also, likewise, if our eye or the focus of our attention is on the negatives, then the lack and limitation that we're focusing on will be experienced in the situations we encounter in our lives. So this means when we focus on the possibilities for greater health, wealth, and happiness in our experiences, we will see these opportunities of good in our experiences. And when our mind is focused on negativity, on anger, or resentment, or revenge, all sorts of grievances, then this is what we will find in our experiences. I know which group I'm aiming for. There's a riddle about two inmates which illustrates the idea of our being able to choose what we see. It goes like this. Two men looked out from prison bars. One saw mud and the other saw stars. A passerby was stopped and asked to explain how this was. What made the difference between what these two men saw? And this person said, well, it's very simple. He said, when the first prisoner looked out the window, he was looking down and he saw mud. And when the second guy looked out the window, he got bumped on the head. That's why he saw stars. I was a bit surprised when I first heard this response because I expected this person to say that the second prisoner looked out the window and looked up in the sky and saw stars. But you know, I know that it's true that I've been bumped on the head a time or two from life circumstances. Maybe you've had that experience too. But for me, I needed that bump on the head because I realized that I was focusing on the mud, not on the stars, to be found in my challenging situations. I needed to be awakened to the truth of that so I could be aware of what I was focusing on. We teach about a spiritual law here in Unity, which explains how our mind works in creating the experience of seeing mud or stars in our experience. We call this the law of mind action. You've probably heard it before because I'm sure I've shared it online before. And this law simply states that thoughts held in mind will produce of their kind. Other expressions for this law, this working law, are the law of giving and receiving, the law of sowing and reaping, the law of cause and effect, and the boomerang law. You know, the Australian boomerang, when you throw it out, it spins back and it comes back to you. The truth is, what we send out or give out, in like measure, as Jesus said, we receive it back in that same measure. Now, a woman named Edith was trying to run away from a problem in her life. And she found, like we all do, that we cannot really run away from problems and challenges because these things have a reason for coming into our experience. That may be to teach us a lesson, to grow us in some way, to teach us more about love, or to teach us more about who we are, our spiritual identity, and our connection with all of life and with God. Edith is the mother of 5 children, so she really has a lot to handle on her shoulders. One afternoon, she left her house just for a few moments to visit with the neighbor next door, the woman next door. And when she returned back home, she entered through the front door and she saw her 5 children sitting in a circle on the living room floor. They were quiet. Something had their attention, and she was very curious as to what it was. So she quietly slipped up to the circle and on the side so she could peep in and see what they were watching. She couldn't believe her eyes when she saw what the children had in that circle. Right there, on her living room floor, were several baby skunks that her kids were enamored by. Edith panicked, and she yelled out to the kids, "Run!" And the children, frightened by their mother's scream, jumped up, and each of them grabbed a skunk and ran with it. I think Edith needed to give more specific instructions like, "Kids, get away from these skunks and run." The moral of the story is, skunks you think, skunks you get. Can you imagine that? We can't run away from who we are because wherever we go, there we are. We can't run away from our problems and challenges either because they'll find a way to us if they have a gift for us. Kind of like the mailman, they used to say, either storm or hail or thunder, whatever kind of weather, the mail person would keep delivering the mail no matter what. And so, these challenges, these opportunities for growth, no matter what, will find us if we run. Of course, what the situation is and how we experience it may be 2 very different things. Mud or stars. What we are able to see and experience in life largely depends on what we're looking at, how we're looking at it, and what we're looking with, our physical eyes or the eyes of our Christ self, that personalized, individualized aspect of God indwelling us, our Christ self. Using our imagination to look through the outer limitations to the possibility of good. I was impressed by the courageous story of a 26-year-old veteran of the Iraqi War. He was featured on the cover of Guidepost magazine, Sargent Bryan Anderson. He had become the fourth American triple amputee who survived the Iraqi War. He received the Purple Heart for his courage and his bravery. And Anderson wrote a highly inspirational memoir about how this happened and how he turned his life around after his experience in Iraq. Bryan Anderson was in a coma. He woke up in a coma at Walter Reed Hospital after being in a coma for 7 days. And when he woke, his mother was there, looking down at him, and she told her son he had been in a horrific accident, but he had two choices that he could choose from. He could die, or he could survive and thrive. Bryan tells in his book called No Turning Back that at that moment he chose to survive and thrive. He shares in his book how important it was for him to hear the supportive, inspiring messages like the one that his mother was giving him over and over and over. Every day when she came to see him, she told him that he had a lot to live for and that he would do important things with his life despite his injuries. And with the support from her, from other family and friends, Bryan made the decision every day to stop seeing himself as a triple amputee, and instead he began mentally seeing himself doing the things that he wanted and loved to do in his life. Prior to this and prior to his term in the service, and he served 2 terms in Iraq, actually, and that last one is when he was injured. He does share this experience in the book, and he also shares about his love of inspiring other disabled vets and children with disabilities. He tells in his book about learning to ride his quad cycle and going snowboarding and climbing mountains, and also playing in the movies. He did work as a stuntman in the movies. He stretched his imagination to see himself doing the things that he loved doing. He played basketball. Looking beyond his physical challenges, Bryan used affirmations, which are positive statements about what he could do. And he used his imagination to see himself doing these things in this role. He believed what his mother and the family and friends were saying. He had a lot to live for, and he was going to do important things with his life. He shared in the book that people were always coming up to him and saying, "You're so lucky that God saved you." And he returned a comment to them by saying, "God did more than just save me. He made my life incredible, with purpose and meaning." And though I am not grateful that I had this experience, I am grateful for what has come out of it. He said, "I love my life. I enjoy being challenged physically and learning new things, learning new ways to do things. With technology, it's made it a lot easier for me. And I love speaking to other people, inspiring them, uplifting them. Okay? I don't want people to feel sorry for me. I want them to see me, the person that I am, beyond my disabilities." And this is what he wrote about in his book. He said it's not a book about war, it's not a book about politics, It's a book about life, and it's a book about challenging ourselves to do more, be more, no matter what, and no matter what form our life takes. I was just really inspired by this 26-year-old, the wisdom that he shared. And he shares a lot of stories of the challenges of getting around and doing things, and he never gave up. He loved his new life, and he said he wanted his life now to be one of service to others and of fun. So, his book is available, No Turning Back, by Brian B Anderson. In the book, he also talks about how his accident occurred. He was driving, he's a sergeant, and he was driving a Humvee. Other guys were in the back. He was up front and he was driving. A IED exploded near the Humvee as he was driving, and the explosion knocked the others riding in the vehicle out. But the rocket tore right through the metal of the Humvee in a straight line, severing his two legs, and because his left arm was down, it took that hand off. He joked that he was able to keep his right arm and hand because he was smoking at the time, and his right arm was up, holding a cigarette, and that's what saved that arm and that hand. Brian initially survived his injuries in the Humvee and didn't bleed out because the heat from the bomb was so hot that it instantly cauterized each of his lesions. The moment he decided to survive and thrive, he chose a different way of looking at his life. And that different way of looking changed his whole life. So, his book is about living no matter the odds, taking chances, stretching ourselves, going beyond outward limitations, holding new visions of ourselves, and going forward. Wow. A triple amputee climbing mountains. He loves speed, and one of the things he loves is riding his car, his race car, his quad. And this ability to see mentally, that is using the gift of imagination, made the difference in his life and continues to make the difference. He gets up every day feeling that it's new and exciting and looking for the opportunity to experience new things, how to serve others and have fun. Great people had said great things about how the imagination works with our faculty of faith to help us see beyond outer limitations. Athletes envision their success at crossing the finish line before they even begin their races. In her book, Staying Well with Guided Imagery, Bella Ruth Naparstek explains that most people make the mistake of thinking that imagery means something strictly visual. She defines imagery as any perception held in our mind which comes through any of our senses. This means imagery can be sights, it can be sounds that we remember in mind, it can be smells that we remember, tastes and touch that we remember in our mind. Recalling it in our mind, the smell of freshly baked cinnamon rolls or the scent of a favorite flower. Rehearing in our mind the sound of a song that we love listening to, or the roar of a noisy motorcycle. Remember in mind the taste of fried chicken or some other favorite food. In fact, can start us salivating if we are near our dinner time. And this shows us that imagery has a direct effect upon our bodies. I know if I express and say the word lemon, and I ask you to think about tasting that lemon, something about the imagination makes it real to the subconscious mind. Even though we're not actually eating a lemon at the time, we can get that sour taste, that feeling of puckering up, okay, from imagining tasting a lemon. So the imagination is very, very powerful. And I think I'm going to go ahead and do another message on the imagination next week. Our body responds to our images and expresses this imagery as if it is something actually happening to us in an outward way right now. These events in mind become events to our body. Using imagery is most effective in a state of relaxed focus, a kind of calm but energized alertness. We concentrate our attention on one very narrow band of things. Now, we are all familiar with this relaxed, energized state, which is most conducive to having success using imagery to affect changes in our thoughts, our feelings, our attitudes, and behaviors. We're in this state when we become so engrossed in something like reading a book or listening to music, we lose track of time. We're in the state called the zone or the flow. Okay? And this is the state of mind that we want to generate when we choose to use imagery in a conscious way. Guided meditations are actually imagery exercises, sometimes using words like affirmations, phrases, and chants, or sometimes using images. The second principle that makes guided imagery work is in the altered state, that quiet, calm, receptive state of mind, we are capable of more rapid and intense healing, growth, learning, and change. Becoming still in body and mind and in attitude, allowing, not forcing images to come. The relaxed space that reflection or meditation creates works the imagination, this imagery process, well. Sometimes listening to gentle music while practicing guided imagery increases its effectiveness. And this morning, in fact, in just a few moments, I am going to share with you a simple guided meditation where in mind, I'm going to invite you to go to a favorite place, to see it in all its rich sensory detail, and to feel a sense of internal peace and gratitude for being there. Some imagery is gentle. Some imagery is powerful, emotional, and deeply felt. It's not always quiet and peaceful and light. Some kinds of imagery, for instance, are deliberately designed by therapists to help a person re-experience a trauma or desensitize from a fear so that they can gain mastery over it. Past experiences can otherwise continue to plague them and diminish their capacity to live their lives fully. The more we use imagery, the more comfortable we become using it. Creative imagery is a lot of fun. It's kind of like an active daydream. Whether you let yourself just drift and relax, and that's the goal, or you actually want to use that imagery to change something about yourself, your attitude, your behavior, your outlook on life. And with Bryan Anderson, it changed his entire life. In fact, it gave him back his life. To be able to see himself being successful and to experience it.